everyone, and welcome to Cosmic Conversations on the Conscious Awakening Network. I'm your host, Sheila Seppi, and I want to welcome you to tonight's episode. Now, this month, for the entire month, we have Dr. Joan that will be here, and she's going to be my co-host for the entire month. And we have our special guest, Victoria Reynolds, and she's going to be discussing transcending fear and recreating Earth. But before Joan introduces Victoria, I want to share just a little bit about Dr. Joan if you don't know all about this woman. So Dr. Joan is also known as Joan of Angels. She's a visionary artist, an intuitive guide, and a transformational mentor, specializing in helping individuals align with their highest divine purpose. And she has a background in chiropractic care and metaphysical healing, and she integrates the physical, emotional, and spiritual well-being into her work, and now she offers what's called esoteric chiropractic. Now, Joan also channels the angelic wisdoms and cosmic messages through her soul portrait. So if you haven't had one, get a hold of Joan. She also helps to hold and facilitates and speaks at workshops and personal sessions, and she's inspiring others to wake to their highest potential. Now, Dr. Joan guides people through personal empowerment, creative expression, and connection to their celestial teams. She empowers them to step fully into their mission. And this month, we're very lucky to have her here as my co-host. So hello, Joan, and welcome.
Sheila, it's always wonderful to see you and see everyone back up on here on the Cosmic Conversations. It was so fun to see everyone last week. And now this week, I'm happy to be back, just like Victoria said. She's happy.
Great, great. Well, we love having you here. And so tonight we have Victoria Reynolds. And Joan, I'm going to let you share just a little bit about Victoria because I think you know her just about as good as anybody.
Yes, so Victoria, you know what? I met Victoria back in 2021, and we were on the same network together. We were both podcast hosts, and I had heard of her because she had her show Fearless and Free, and I just was taken by her. I just thought she was an amazing personality, and we became friends. And as a result of the friendship, we've traveled the world together, basically. Victoria went with us to Egypt last year, to Greece, Glastonbury. We've traveled the world. She's not just, she used to call herself a spiritual luminary. She still is a spiritual luminary. She's a spiritual teacher. She's an entrepreneur. She's a media mogul. She's involved now these days in films, books, events, and media, especially media. She is extraordinary in some of her gifts. She has a very special gift that she may talk about tonight, which is that she can see your future. And she can, by seeing your future, she can look at what you're doing, your business, your work, the title of your shows, whatever. She can look at what you're doing and see what it took to make you successful, and even download for you a plan that you can use to create your present and your future. It's a marvelous gift. She's in constant communication with my father, as a matter of fact, trying to get him in the game. But when I discovered she had this talent, I was mind-boggled. I mean, mind-boggled. She's really able to see and go into the future. She can remote view what it is your next steps are, which I think is phenomenal. She's also a celebrity speaker, a celebrity entrepreneur. She's been on all sorts of television shows, including in LA, Phoenix, Sarasota, I think maybe soon Miami. So she's been on some top television shows, and she's an amazing being. So Victoria, we are very happy to see you tonight.
Thank you, Joan. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation and for that wonderful introduction. I gratefully received that.
It's a treat to know you.
Likewise.
Well, great. So, Victoria, welcome, welcome, welcome. We are excited to have you back, and I can't wait to hear what you have to share tonight.
Yeah, so today I wanted to talk a little bit about what I call musings, discovering first how how I came to recognize that I am a muse and a spiritual luminary. It's really interesting because I had these gifts as a child, but I didn't recognize that's what they were. Part of me thought everybody talked to themselves because I would talk to myself and I would get an answer. And the answers that I would get would be sometimes very different from what the adults around me were telling me. So I started learning to not question because I got spanked if I told them what I thought things were. And also because I grew up in an extremely a fundamentalist polygamist cult, the Doomsday Cult in Montana. And part of my upbringing was that anything that wasn't justified or explained by my parents' religion came from the devil. And that these insights and these ideas I had were the devil trying to tempt me. So growing up, I was actually afraid of my gifts. But I didn't realize there was a part of me that was afraid of them. At the same time, I assumed everybody talked to themselves and actually heard themselves answer. So it's something I've always had the ability to do, the ability to see. I'm very telepathic. I get packets of information from my higher guidance team, from my higher self, and I call my team, and from the teams of people, the clients that I'm working with. And these include words, visuals, the names of things, like in Joan's dad's case. I laugh with Joan. I tell her dad's always haunting me because he hangs around a lot. I think he kind of likes me. um, and so like he showed me the way he dressed when Joan was a kid, and then I would confirm that with her, and she's like, "Oh my gosh, that's exactly how he was." So I started realizing that I had these gifts, but I didn't really know what to do with them. And then um, about 20 years ago, I had my first awakening experience in 1987 during the uh, what was it called? The convergence. Yeah, some kind of convergence that happened in 1987. And that's when I discovered my spiritual path. And I started down the spiritual path and I started reading self-help books. I was very suicidal at the time. So I tell people that spirituality and self-help books saved my life. I was trying to figure out how to get out of my life, and they helped me to discover who I am and come back into my being and start to like myself. So about 20 years ago, I was writing a book. I wanted to write a book about my childhood, and I attended a writers conference, a women's writers conference. And while we were there in this small group, the instructor said, "Now I want you to go outside and have a conversation with your inner critic." Now, I had no idea what an inner critic was. I'd never heard the term before. So I went outside and I sat on this rock wall and I said, "Okay, inner critic, what do you have for me?" And so the message that came through was, "I am not your critic. I am your inner muse. And if you'll sit with me, I will teach you what to write." And of course, my first excuse was, I have a newborn baby and I have a house to clean. When am I supposed to do dishes and laundry? And the response was, "The dishes and the laundry can wait. Sit with me and I will show you what to write." What was really fascinating is that turned on a tap and I started writing voraciously every day. I've been writing every day for the last 20 something years because I wake up in the morning and it just floods in. This is why I've been able to write 8 books. And I've always got another one. I'm writing another one now called Catching Confidence. So because this information is constantly flooding in, and it also gives me the ability to see the future. So a lot of the things that are happening in the world right now, I wrote in notebooks 10 years ago. So it's really fascinating to see what I wrote about 10 years ago starting to take place on the planet now. So this inner muse was the beginning of me starting to recognize that I had the ability to listen to a voice. Again, I assumed everybody else did it, and I didn't realize until later that not everybody, at least those who haven't started to wake up and go down their spiritual path, they don't necessarily know how to do, or they don't recognize it because people are told, "Oh, don't talk to yourself." Well, who's going to give you the best answers? Right? Your inner teacher is the most wise teacher you can find. And so we should be listening, talking to ourselves and listening to ourselves. And then in 2010, I had an experience where I was more consciously bridged with my higher self. And from that moment, that's when I started hearing not just my higher self, but that's when I started hearing my spirit guides. And the more that my higher self worked consciously with my personality self, my physical self, and I began to that higher aspect of me began to merge down into my being. And so we've talked about this before. The last time I think we talked about being a walk-in. So my walk-in is a little bit different in that I call it a merge down, where my higher self has merged, more of my higher self has merged into my vessel, so that as I move through life, I'm constantly in that space of seeing my life from a 10,000 foot perspective. This actually allows me to go through life being nomadic and not living in fear about where I go next, because my life works like magic. Everything just lines right up, and it's not always clear, but when I look back, it's very obviously clear. That's, without getting into details, that's how I ended up with the bungalow in Sarasota. This amazing place I'm staying right now was coordinated for me on the runway at LAX on Monday night. So it's what I wanted to share with people is that we all have within us the ability to be that guided if we'll just listen. We all have an inner muse. We all have a connection to our higher self, and it's a matter of asking questions and really listening for the answer, and getting out of our mind, getting out of our head, and getting into that heart space and being open to whatever it is that spirit is telling us. So that is a nutshell of where I came from, growing up in this environment, being told not to listen to myself, or now that's pretty much all I do. And it's an extraordinary way to go through life.
So for people,
And
who may want to get in touch with their higher self or aspects of their higher self, do you have any tips that you can recommend for them?
well, the number one thing is to not doubt yourself. So when I first started doing this work, and I'll never forget, I actually, this was 2010, and the channeling was still a fairly new concept for humanity. And I won't get into the details, but the Guardians were having a very difficult time communicating with human beings because there were very few people who had the ability to really tap in and listen. So there was one day I was standing in my bathroom and I had about 10 different beings talking to me. And I was like, stop, just stop. I can't listen to all of you all at once. Just one at a time, please. So I would sit on my couch every morning and I would write the messages coming through. And not long into that process, I asked, how can I tell the difference between imagination and inspiration? Because I couldn't tell the difference. And the answer was, they are the same. So it's really, really important when people are sitting and asking and then listening to understand that the messages they're getting, that imagination and inspiration are the same thing, and to trust that, because that's what's coming in. Now, one of the things that I do, and I think it's really, really important for people to understand and to practice this. I practice spiritual protection on a daily basis. When I sit down and I bring a message through, I command that only the highest divine truth is allowed to enter my mind, and anything that isn't aligned with my highest and greatest good is not allowed into my mind. Because if you don't stipulate the information where it's coming from, then there are entities who are looking for an easy mind to get into. So if you're opening up a channel to communicate with your higher self, make sure that you set protection and you set very specific parameters on who and what is allowed to enter your mind. And so when you do that, you're better able to trust the information that comes in.
Awesome. Awesome. And do you recommend that people like meditate a certain amount of time to drop into this space? How do you make your connections?
It's a great question.
That is a great question. You know what? Meditation is something that it's unique to the individual. So there are some people that meditate for hours a day. My brain just does not do that. I can't, yeah. I do what I call a walking meditation. So I'll go out and go for a walk, and I'll be in this beautiful space and this connection with divine when I'm out walking. Right now I'm dog sitting for a friend. So when I take the dog out for a walk, I just close my eyes and I breathe and I allow spirit to come through, even when I'm out walking in the park. So the key is that it becomes a way that you live your life, that your life becomes a meditation, that your life becomes spirit experiencing itself as you. And when you live your life that way, then at least in my case, I'm able to just drop right in. When I'm at home, like right now, I have meditation music. I have like this angelic music playing. I always try to have something in my space that keeps me in that calm and in that creative space. And I said, and I'm always asking up. I always, in everything I do, what's best and what's next. And I always call in the highest divine truth. I don't know how many times a day I do that. It is the way that I live my life.
Awesome. Awesome. So when Joan was talking, she mentioned that you are now remote viewing the future to assist people with planning, with their business plans, their life plans, etc. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So I didn't know what remote viewing was. I didn't know that I had the ability to do that. And but Joan's experienced it a couple of times. Uh, where I've been with a client, and I had one woman tell me she was having headaches, and I said, "Oh, there's mold behind your washing machine downstairs in the basement." Now, I didn't even know she had a basement. So she went downstairs, and sure enough, there was mold behind her washing machine. Um, and like with Joan a couple of months ago, she without getting the details, we were looking for the power things, the switches. And I was like, oh, go to the closet, and it's behind the clothes on the right. So I can actually see where things are. So an example of the future, I have one client who, I have a lot of clients that have sessions with me because they want to know what their future is. And so I'll share one with you where she asked me, and I said, you have a huge, huge backyard. And I said, I can see um, you're going to be having garden parties. And she said, what do you mean? I said, actual garden parties. People come to your yard and you will show them how to garden, and you pick the vegetables and pick the things, and then you'll have a party with the things that you pick. Like, that's a completely different kind of garden party, but that's what I was saying, is that she would have garden parties. And she said, oh my gosh, I've always wanted to grow things in my backyard. So with regard to people's future paths, I can see that very clearly. And then with regard to, for example, their books, I had someone that I met with the other day, and he's in the middle of writing a book, and he gave me the title of his book, and I just said, you know what, that is actually an awful name for a book. No one will ever buy that book. However, and I looked at him for a minute and I said, oh, and I heard the words in my head, um, Raising, and then his son's last name. I said, what's your son's last name? He said, Eddie. I said, well, that's the name of your book. It's Raising Eddie. And the subtitle is A Father's Guide to Special Needs, or Fathering a Special Needs Child. So, and the cover of his book, I can see very clearly. It's a dad with his son. So it's that kind of thing as well. I can actually see it. And then I said, no, this is actually two different books. You have two different books here. One of them is the story of fathering a special needs child. And as an attorney who knows how to work the system, the other book is called Working the System, a legal guide to your special needs child. So it ended up being two different books. So that's the kind of thing that I do. I can actually see very clearly what the title of their book is, the name of the book, the content that's in the book, and what their message is. So he's starting to get very clear that, as I explained to this particular person, I said, you're like every mainstream channel across the country would love to have you on, because you're going to be the expert who teaches people how to handle the special needs programs using the system in a positive way. And nobody's talking about that. People are complaining about their special needs kids, but there's nobody teaching the solutions. So that's a way that I'm working with clients to help them define their future path, because I actually work with their end of life self, and we reverse engineer their path based on their end of life self. And then we'll go back into their future, because most of us have a trauma story. Where in the trauma story are the clues that we pick up throughout our life that our future self uses to create that path we're here to be on? Because we all have that pain story for a purpose. It's just a matter of figuring out how that purpose best serves the best path. And all that work is done here in the present. It's really fun.
Right. So
I watched you in action, by the way. I actually watched her with this man as she was telling him like what, I mean, and I heard from him after, he was quite impressed that you could see the titles of his book and what they were. Do you help people write their books, organize their books? Like, is that part of the coaching services that you offer?
Yeah, I have what I call a concierge media services. And so what I will do with people is help them, one, get an idea of the book. Then the second step that we do is lay out the outline for it. And then even if they need ghostwriting, I'll go in and actually ghostwrite it, or I clean it up for them, edit it, and ghostwrite it for them if that's what they're looking for. So and even run a best-selling campaign for them if that's something they're interested in. So it's actually a menu of services that are available, and you kind of pick and choose from the menu of what it is that you need help with. For some people, it might just be a half-day session with me, getting really clear about their message and their purpose and the title of their book and some of that. And for some people, it might be the entire buffet. So there is a buffet to choose from. And the reason I call it concierge is because a lot of it I actually do for you. So, for example, someone can tell you to write a book, but a lot of people don't even know where to get started. So I'll help with that as well.
Have you been ghostwriting too? I mean, if someone wants a ghostwriter, can you work with that?
Yeah, and that's actually kind of interesting, because when I'm ghostwriting, I'm actually it's a little bit different, where I'm actually working with their higher self and their future self when I'm writing. And so it's almost like I'm actually working with their ghost, right? And so it's a little bit different, but because I can tap into a person's story and the message their higher self and their future self wants them to tell, then I can ghostwrite from that perspective. Like, what is the future? What future wants to be written now? So, and because I do, and I also can telepathically communicate with other people who are part of the story, and that's interesting, an interesting way to approach writing as well, because it's not just, because nothing is ever just one thing. No perspective is ever just that one perspective. So if I'm communicating with other people's higher selves or part of the story, it actually creates a more complex and a more interesting story.
Beautiful.
We have someone here who has read your book, Transforming Fear. Can you give us a little bit more about what was going on for you when you wrote that book?
Oh, Transcending Fear, yes.
Transcending. Well,
yeah. So
you wrote it as Transforming Fear, which also is,
because technically you are transforming it as well.
Right.
So I wrote the first edition of.
Yeah, I couldn't remember the exact name, so I didn't have it in front of me. Sorry about that.
It's a different. Yeah, it's okay. It is a different word. I was actually given that back in 2011 when I started actually writing that book in 2010. So I was given that title back in 2010, and it's interesting because I actually had to Google it because I didn't know what it meant. And it means above and beyond. So I started writing that book back in 2010, the first edition, when my children were 2 and 5. After the 2008 recession, I was suicidal, and I had lost my business. I had lost my home was in foreclosure. We were in bankruptcy, obviously, and marriage, and my kids were both diagnosed with learning disorders, and so I was having a very difficult time. And that's about the time that I started communicating with my higher self. So I would go for a walk every day because I discovered it was either take antidepressants with a side effect of suicide, or get my butt out of bed early in the morning and go for a walk, which is, I decided that because I had kids who needed me, a walk was a better investment of my time and energy than popping some pills. So and so all this information started just flooding in. And the messages that came from my higher self are the messages that are in that book. There were messages from my higher self to me for how to remedy and heal my life. And I took those and I put them in the first edition of Transcending Fear. The one that's available now is the 10-year anniversary edition that has an entire an entire 7th chapter that was not in the first one, and then additional information about how I've used that content over the past 10 years to raise my kids. So my kids are now 19 and 22. And I use the process in Transcending Fear to reparent myself as I was parenting my children. Mm-hmm. And that's really what that book is about, is about how can we process the stories of our past so that our stories and even our greatest pain stories actually become the catalyst for the life we were born to live. So taking those most painful stories and turning them into stories of triumph and transformation, so that they not only serve us and give us the strength and the power to move forward in our lives, because we can actually see the value in the pain story. One of the things I share with people is that there's a point when you start to learn how to love the most painful stories in your life, because you see the value that they've provided you, and there's no longer any victimization or attachment to that. And really, this transcendence process that I teach in that book really needs to be applied to the entire human collective story. So part of the issue with the entire human collective is we keep retelling the same stories over and over and over again, and we're not learning the lessons, we're not seeing the value in them, and until we transmute them, until we transform those stories out of victimization and into self-empowerment, we'll continue to make the same mistake. So the transcendence process is about taking those really, really painful stories and turning them into power stories.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Now we have somebody that wanted to ask you about dowsing. Says they use a crystal pendulum, and sometimes it's not easy for them to meditate and to clear their mind to hear. But sometimes the information just drops in to answer something that she's been thinking about. So do you have any comments about that? Or any insights?
Yeah. I don't actually use any tools. I have dowsing rods, and there's a funny story. They don't work because of I wanted crystals on them, and then they're too heavy, so they don't actually work. I've tried pendulums. I'm really good at losing them. So the answers usually come in really, really, really clear. Now with the pendulum, for myself, Joan's like the pendulum queen. She carries them with her everywhere she goes. And sometimes I'm like, don't ask your pendulum, because it gets really, really fast answers. When I'm working with a pendulum, I ask my higher self and my guides to infuse the pendulum with the answer of what's best for me. So that's how I use them. I can't speak for other people, but I always ask the pendulum to show me the highest. Use the pendulum with the answer of what's best for me. And the pendulum is great for really, really quick yes, no answers. But a lot of times for me personally, the answer just comes in as complete sentences, as complete thoughts. So I don't even need the pendulum. The answer is just very, very clear. So and that's why I was saying that the most important thing is that you learn to really trust that inner voice, because sometimes the answers are really, really clear, and we just have to trust that.
Mhm. So I want to kind of circle back to when you were talking about the future and how you use that for individuals to help them lay out certain plans. Um, do you kind of look into the future to kind of see what's up for humanity as a whole? And
Oh,
if you
for sure.
do you
Yeah,
have anything to share about that?
I've been doing that for decades, and I didn't even know that's what I was doing. So, um, I actually get visuals that go with it. So let me think of one. Back in 2014, my first conversation with Saint Germain was about these gamma waves that, but we were calling them G waves. He called them G waves, and I said, "Well, what are these G waves?" And he said, "They're gamma waves, and they're going to be changing the human DNA and activating crystalline codes, like activating junk DNA." So I got this message back in the summer of 2014. And what he was saying is that this light, this would become more and more and more frequent, and they become stronger and stronger and stronger, and that eventually there would be, and they're coming from a singularity, and that eventually there would be an explosion basically in this flash of light. So I find it really fascinating that about 2 years ago, other people started talking about this solar flash that's coming.
Mhm.
It isn't necessarily a solar flash coming from our sun. It's coming from another sun that exploded. And those have been coming and hitting the earth more and more and more frequently. And as they come slowly enough, they've been changing our body's ability to adjust to them. Because if they all came at once, we wouldn't be adjusting to these light waves as they've been coming in. This is why so many people are waking up. This is why so many more people now have telepathic abilities. So many more people are psychic than they used to be. These spiritual gifts are being activated by these gamma waves that are coming, and they're actually activating our superpowers. And one of the ways that I got the confirmation for that is I had this conversation with Saint Germain, and then I went into the house where my family was watching Fantastic Four. And they said, "Mom, do you want to watch the movie with us?" And I had never seen the beginning of it. And I said, I was excited that I actually get to see the beginning of a movie, because as moms, we don't really get to see the beginning of movies, because we make dinner and everybody else sits down and starts eating, and we're still, anyway, that was one of my things of, but they always started movies without me. So I got to see the beginning of the movie. And what's really interesting is that these people were in a spaceship out in space. And they got hit by these gamma waves, and it activated their superpowers, which is exactly what Saint Germain was explaining to me. The gamma waves, the G waves, God, goddess, creation waves, we're going to be activating humanity's superpowers. So that is what we've been seeing. It's not like suddenly we're going to turn into Superman and fly away. The superpowers are our spiritual superpowers, the ability to see beyond the veil, the ability to move into higher levels of consciousness, where we're able to see and experience life very loud, to become more of who they are.
So in your opinion, are the waves coming from the great central sun and interacting with our sun? Because I know, our sun is going through the solar maximus, and it's almost at that pivotal point where it'll have its pole shift, which happens about every 11 years. I'm just wondering, since these have been coming in so strongly, how that's really affecting, all the particle waves that are really flooding the planet. Because I know here the electromagnetics must have been affected of the Earth, because with this last major solar flare, one of the things that happened is we had the aurora borealis, and we never get the aurora borealis, you know.
Yeah.
So I know it's really affecting the electromagnetic field, which of course in turn will affect humanity.
Mhm. Yeah, our sun acts like a portal for it. So, and yes, the aurora borealis was seen as far south as Southern California,
Hmm.
which is unheard of, right? It's normal for Alaska. And when I was growing up in Montana, it was normal for Montana, but to see it as far south as Southern California is unheard of.
Yeah.
So those electromagnetic pulses are also changing our frequency. The universe is so brilliant the way that it works. And these gamma waves we don't actually see. People keep thinking there's going to be a flash of light, but we can't see them with our physical eyes. The sun is a portal for passing that energy forward. It's from a star so these waves are coming from a star that exploded. My understanding is it's Betelgeuse, and that this final flash hasn't occurred yet. So these pulses, as they're hitting the sun, are causing the sun to become more active, and that activity is now what's causing because we've actually had some X-class flares in the last week, causing those flares. And as this light gets brighter, and I saw this actually very clearly this morning, as this light gets brighter, those who work in the dark will no longer be able to hide in the shadows because there's so much light that the shadows can't even exist. So before the light started hitting the planet, those who work on behalf of the dark, it was easy enough for them to hide what they were up to.
Right.
But now, because there's so much light flooding the planet, and all of us are having our own light bodies activated, that the dark side of the contrast won't be able to hide what it's up to anymore because there's so much light. And at some point, and I can't see when, whenever I ask when this is going to happen, my team always says, well, time works differently on planet Earth, so it's impossible to pinpoint a time. But the light is continuing to get bigger and bolder and brighter and more frequent until there is a like a final explosion, a final blast of light that illuminates everything on the planet. But we might not see it with our eyes. And one of the other things I was shown with this is that it's actually going to be a day out of time. So time will actually stand still. Because time stands still, no one will even know anything happened, except those who are aware enough to go, wow, something is really different. That's the only way we'll know.
Yeah. You know, Kiara Windwriter talks about the teaching of the indigenous people, saying when that time stands still, one of the things that actually happens is all of our bodies will separate, and then they come back together. They kind of separate because, you know, those, even our soul bodies are, you know, held together with this little electromagnetic field. And because the electromagnetics no longer are what they were on the earth, that we don't need that, and everything separates. That's the 3 days of darkness, and then they come back together, and that's when we have our light bodies. And I find, you know, all these teachings and all of these insights that people are having and bringing back to the planet, you know, they're all a little different, but they're all saying the exact same thing. So, you know, what exciting times are we living in?
Very, very
Very
exciting.
exciting. Yeah.
Do
And
you
it
see?
isn't going to be,
Go ahead.
it's going to be a little bit more chaotic before it gets there.
Oh, yeah.
So one of the messages I got, I don't know, 2014, 2016, without finding my notebooks, was that the plan was for this to happen as chaos free as possible. Not that there won't be chaos, but to try to mitigate the chaos as much as possible so that humanity doesn't drop back down into those lower vibrations, because so many of us are lifting our frequency up. We want to be able to maintain that frequency.
Yeah.
So to keep it as chaos free as possible so we don't drop back down. Now, the dark side of the contrast would love for us to all drop down into hysteria and chaos and fear and all of that, so they can play another level of the game at their level. But so it's really, really, really important that we don't allow our consciousness to drop down into the problems. This problem, that problem, and where a lot of people do, they can't help but get sucked into the problems. They're really, really, really important. We stay focused on what are the solutions? How can I keep myself in this higher vibration? Which is, listening to the music that inspires you, hanging out with other people that inspire, having these kinds of conversations that keep our frequency up at this higher frequency, so that we don't drop down in, because at some point there is going to be this separation. And at that point of separation, there are going to be some people who separate off into that lower consciousness. One of the best ways to explain to people, if you've ever seen the movie called Yesterday, I don't know if you've seen it. It was a movie that came out, I think, in like 2017. And there was a solar flash. And when time turned back on, they were on a different timeline. And there were things in that timeline that existed in the old timeline, but that don't exist in the new timeline. And most people had no idea this other stuff existed. There were just a handful of people that remembered Coca-Cola, for example, didn't exist in the other. It doesn't exist in the new timeline. Well, only a handful of people remembered this, and the Beatles. Then it was really about the Beatles. So in the old timeline, the Beatles existed. In the new timeline, the Beatles didn't. And so when this event happens, and one of the things I explain to people is that there will be things in this new reality that never existed.
Mhm.
And so, but most people won't even know, because those events and those individuals who cause the greatest suffering never actually existed.
Right. Yeah. A couple points on that. One, so many people are running around talking about how bad things are, how dark things are, but nothing has changed. I think more and more people are waking up, and they're finding it less tolerable for these things that's in the dark. Plus, the more light you have, the less shadow you have. Okay. So the light shining on the darkness. And then the other thing, as you were talking about this new reality, I'm just wondering, with the various dimensions that we currently operate in, as well as all of the parallel universes, if they're all going to collapse into one timeline.
Well, they actually have been.
Oh, yeah.
One of the things that, yeah, I mean, one of the things I explained to people, and I was just telling someone today that we've had this timeline convergence that's been occurring over the last few years. So the easiest way for me to explain it, living in Los Angeles, we have these freeways that have 12 lanes. You can't take all 12 lanes and just merge them together, right? That would be mass chaos. Oh my gosh. That was Carmageddon, as we would call it here in California. So those lanes have to slowly merge until they become one. And then at the split, then those two realities split back off. So what's really fascinating is that now, because these different timelines and realities have converged, we're seeing things we couldn't even see before. So for example, the Tartaria stuff, it's always been there, but nobody could actually see it. We can now see it because the timelines where it existed are now obvious in our timeline. So there are things that have existed in various timelines, and we might see bits and pieces of them, but they're starting to make sense because of the timeline convergence. It's like, oh my gosh, I always wondered why there were windows under the street kind of thing. Well, now it's making sense, because in one timeline, Tartaria didn't exist, and in another timeline it did, and that's why we're now able to see it, because different aspects were spread out across different timelines. So as they converge, we can actually see a whole picture.
And so do you think that's responsible for what they call the Mandela effect then? That people have different memories of the same thing that might have occurred on their timeline.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's why people remember things very, very differently. Like I've had that experience at dinner one time with my husband a couple of years ago. Then that's really trippy to know that that we were basically living in the same house in two parallel realities. So we'd sit at the table and have a conversation, and he doesn't remember what I just said, or he'd say, "What did you just say?" And I never said it. Like, that's not what I said. So we were experiencing like side by side realities in the same space, which was really, really trippy. And trying to communicate with him was like this, because we weren't even in the same reality. Communicating was next to impossible because we were living in two different um, realities in the same space. Um, does that help?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that makes sense for sure. So when did you officially come out as Victoria, and how did that interact with the timelines in your home, your family? Like, how did that evolve that you finally came out as who you are now?
So I realized back in 2010, my name was Margaret, and my married name was Margaret Federer. And I had started writing this book, and every time I'd put my name down, I would hear wrong name, wrong name, wrong name. I'm like, okay, that's weird. And about the same time, I started communicating with my higher self, and actively knowing it was my higher self I was communicating with. And I was on the beach one day, and I had was on the beach and there with my kids, and there was a dad there with his daughter, and he said, "Victoria, Victoria, come on, honey." And I heard, "That's my name." And I was like, okay, so I'm communicating with this being named Victoria. Now, I thought Victoria was someone else. I thought I was doing an Esther Hicks thing where I was, she works with Abraham. I was Margaret, communicating with this being named Victoria. And I was writing my posts in my newsletters and working on my book under the name Margaret. And so I told my husband, I said, I'm getting messages every morning when I sit on the couch from this being named Victoria. And is it okay if I start using, like, telling people that? And he said, well, no. He's like, you can't tell anybody. Like that weird Esther Hicks lady, you can't tell anybody you do that.
Oh.
So I said, then is it okay if I use her name as a pseudonym? He's like, yeah, that's fine, whatever. You just can't tell people that you're talking to, right? So I started writing, and I'd sit on the couch and I'd write my affirmations and my meditations, and I'm working on transcending fear. And I think that there's this being named Victoria that's giving me this information on how to heal my life. And then one day I was with a friend of mine, and she was talking about another person that she knows. And she said, oh, so and so also communicates with his higher self, but he doesn't use his higher self name the way that you do. And I was like, oh, so that's me talking to me? And it said, that explains why every morning I would sit down at the beginning of every message was, I am you, you are me, we are one. And I would always say, yeah, 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 in the mind of the universe, we're all one. I didn't realize it actually was me. So um, so I've been writing and using the name Victoria for until 2019. And I had already talked to my husband about getting a divorce. We were in marriage counseling, and uh and I just realized that I needed to actually change my name. And what prompted that was I had a paycheck, someone had paid me, and I went into the bank to cash it, and they wouldn't let me cash it because my bank name was under Margaret Federer and the check name was Victoria Reynolds, and the Homeland Security would no longer allow me to use a pseudonym. So that's when I realized I actually needed to change my name. So I physically and legally changed my name to Victoria Reynolds in 2019. And I started coming out of the spiritual closet and telling people that I was a conscious channel. I didn't tell anybody that before. I have an entire filing cabinet full of notebooks of channeled messages I never shared with anyone. I didn't really come out of the spiritual closet, as I call it, until after I got divorced in 2020, because it was so uncomfortable in my own home trying to be two different people. I call it doing spiritual splits. So Margaret Fuder was 3D, mom, volunteer school, doing all the school stuff, being a normal, ordinary mom, doing, teaching classes and all that. And then Victoria Reynolds, who was the person who was doing the spiritual, the coaching and writing books. And so I had to choose which of those two realities I would live in. And part of choosing the higher dimensional and who I'm really here to be meant that I had to let go of my husband. And that ended up being obviously one of the most difficult decisions in my life, because he is the love of my life. And I also had to let him go in order for me to be who I'm here to be. And when I let him go, that allowed me to step fully without reservation into who I really am.
Beautiful, beautiful.
That
Okay, we have about 10 minutes left. So let's check and see if we have any questions. Says, I find that there are some people who attract and reflect and hold energy, and I can then feel the energy physically and the pressure in my third eye, and the crown increases. And listening to Victoria, the energy is intense. So that was from Stacy. All right. Okay, Cindy, you have a quick question? Let me. There you go.
What is the question?
Trying to
She
unmute.
didn't write it.
There it goes. Okay, my question was about your writing services. How do I get in touch with you? Because I was working on a book, but
Yeah, I can see it's a little
a
difficult.
little hard.
You know what? You can just shoot me an email to victoria@victoriareynolds.com,
Okay.
and I'll talk to you about that. I think in your case, well, we'll talk about that.
Okay.
Uh, I find that there are ways that you can actually begin the creative writing process just using your microphone.
Really? Because I've been using the voice dictation, but you know how you always have to correct the darn thing, and then it ends up being harder than typing sometimes. But I was fascinated with your work with the ghostwriting. Really was so cool that you're actually picking up the other person's ghost. I thought that was way cool.
Yeah, it's interesting
Thanks,
work.
Cindy.
Yeah, because I also get the visuals that go with it, and that's what I find really fascinating. I can see what people are wearing and the environment they're in. Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
You'd be great as a novelist then.
Yes, if I just finish my own novel.
There you go. Well, let me ask, before we end up wrapping everything up, if you could give like 3 different messages to the world, what would that be?
The first one I'm hearing is to remind people to stay calm, because everything is unfolding in perfect divine order. Part of the issue is that human beings are trying to control the outcome, but the outcome is already assured. The what we're seeing right now is the final collapse of the dark side of the contrast. So if you're focusing only on the darkness, that's all you're going to see. But ultimately, in order for the light to I don't like to say win because it isn't a win-lose. God is all that is, and all that is God. Love, spirit, universe, whatever you want to call it, the divine presence that is and creates all things. And that the what we call dark versus light is the dark side of the contrast that we as souls agreed to learn through. So as souls, we agreed to incarnate and experience the contrast of light and dark because we can't see our light without the darkness. The darkness exists to serve the light. The darkness exists for us to recognize our own light. And without it, we wouldn't see our own light. And but what's happening now is that as a collective of souls, we have now agreed for this to be a planet of peace. This occurred, I'm going to say, about 3 years ago. One of the very first messages that came in for me in 2010 was that Earth is a learning planet until the collective of souls determined for it to be a planet of peace. This was clear back in like 2010 that I heard this message. The message that came in a couple of years ago, maybe 2-3 years ago, was that the collective of souls have now voted for this to be a planet of peace, which means now what the process that's occurring now is that in the future, human beings will learn through joy rather than suffering. So what's happening right now is all the darkness is showing itself. So this isn't the darkest time that's ever been. We're just actually seeing it for the first time. And all this darkness is coming out. We're looking at the skeletons in the closets, and we're rolling up the carpets and looking at all the stuff that was swept under the rugs. We are looking at all the crap that has been occurring in the human experience so that we can transmute it, so that we can transform it into from stories of suffering into stories of triumph. So all of this is happening for a reason. So not to get caught up in the chaos and to hold firmly to the truth that we are all love, having a human experience, and to stay calm in it, and to hold to the truth that we will see this through. The more of us who focus on the solutions, the more of us who focus on how can I be the most loving presence on the planet? How can I expand my own light so that others can start to see the light within themselves? How can I focus on the solutions? The sooner all this old world will start to fall away. It's really up to us, with that old saying that we're the ones we've been waiting for, and we are the divine intervention we seek. It's not an external being that's going to come and rescue us. We're the ones we've been waiting for. And when we really, really own that, then we start to understand that we are actually the ones that are creating an entirely new world. It's not going to just manifest magically by someone else doing it. We're actually it. By our choices, by our actions, by who we are being, by the way we approach our experiences, we can approach them with gratitude and the ability to to turn them into a positive experience, or we can complain about them and hold ourselves in victimization and suffering. So it's really up to us.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Oh,
Thank you.
we have a question about the painting behind you that kind of looks like you.
Uh-huh.
You want to tell them why you're attracted to it?
Okay. So this is my favorite painting that Dr. Joan of Angels painted. And it's interesting because when she showed it to me, I was like, oh, that painting is so beautiful. And then she explained to me that my daughter was the inspiration for it. And then that it's Nike. Now, I was Nike in one of my lifetimes, the goddess Nike. And so it just, I looked at that picture and it just spoke to me more than any of her other paintings. And then when she explained to me why and what the inspiration was for it, then it made perfect sense. But I guess it's kind of a self-portrait in a sense.
Awesome.
Sweet. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Got that beautiful shape of your face and your daughter's face.
Nice. So, Joan, let me ask you, do you have any final words that you'd like to share tonight?
Victoria, I love the way you explain a little bit more deeply about who you are and how you perceive the world and how the universe and your guides and angels really work through you to clarify for you the direction. And I love that. I think it's amazing. You have some amazing gifts and talents. And I've just enjoyed watching you step into them. Like you couldn't have said 3 years ago that you see the future. You didn't quite understand it in the way that you'd come back and tell us you see the future. So I feel excited to see how you like put the dots together for your own gifts, which means we can all do that as we put all of this together. And I see how you've done it since 2020. And truly remarkable, really, truly remarkable to use those gifts for humanity. So guys, you can reach her, you can work with her, you can follow her. She's going to be doing YouTube shows again and has a lot of other programs that you can work with her on.
And so, Victoria, do you want to go ahead and share your website and once more how people can get a hold of you?
I am the easiest person to find. My website is victoriareynolds.com. And you can email me at victoria@victoriareynolds.com.
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful. Well, I want to thank you for being here tonight and sharing all your wonderful gifts with us and sharing everything that you see and really helping to, I think bring some clarity for some people. And I know that everyone who's watching, everyone who will be getting this on a replay, I know that the energy that you put behind the words and that vibration will, carry through to them. So thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
Me
Thank you
too.
very much.
I also want everyone to know, how many books do you have on Amazon, Victoria?
7. So I've written 8, but Transcending Fear is a second edition of the first one. So there's 7 books on Amazon. Yes.
And they're all good.
Beautiful, beautiful. And then speaking of books, I want to share my screen and share with you the new book that just came out over the weekend. This is Cosmic Convergence. It's Journeys of Walk-ins, Starseeds, and Hybrids, but we also talk about dimensions and densities and timelines and, parallel universes. We talk about all the holographic field, the body, the chakras, the ley lines, etc. And this was really, I've always wanted to do something with Barbara. Absolutely love Barbara, adore her. And so when I started writing this, it's like, oh, I need to get Barbara involved somehow. So she has contributed and written, a dozen different hypnotic sessions and regressions up that she is included in the book of people who have woken up to be in a starseed, a walk-in, or a hybrid. And so for all those individuals who think they may be a walk-in, starseed, or hybrid, then this will be a really great resource for you. The walk-ins is really, I've built on that from the first book that I wrote, Walk-ins, Cosmology of the Soul. And this gives a lot more detail about the different types of walk-ins that I've encountered. And I'm sure over the next several years, I'm going to encounter even more. We always try to label things to help us to be better able to understand and to digest what is happening. So that's what I really hope that this book does for people, is allows them, to have something that they can understand. So this is available right now. The actual official, excuse me, release is November the 22nd, but we're doing a special release, an early release with Amazon. So if you get a chance, please check it out. I would deeply appreciate it. So
Congratulations, Sheila, just to put that out there.
Oh, thank you.
Like everyone wants that energetic clapping.
Yay. Thank you guys
Well
so
done.
much.
Well done.
I appreciate it. It's another labor of love. So I hope that it really touches everybody that reads it. And I want to say, doing all of these shows is a labor of love, because I love coming on every time and seeing everybody and seeing your smiling faces. And I love your wonderful questions. And I love all the emails that I've been getting from different people who are watching us and sharing with this speaker just said the exact right thing at the exact moment in my life, and it totally opened me up. So thank you so much for sharing all of those beautiful stories with us. So until we are all back together again next time. Oh, wait a minute. Joan, do you want to tell them a little bit about our speaker for
Oh my
next
God.
day?
Yes. Next week we have Maureen St. Germain. And she's just come out with a new book on ascension and the fifth dimension. So I'm sure she's going to talk about that as well. But she's extremely powerful teacher. I remember when I interviewed her, she talks about how every day she says, today is the day heaven, I'm living heaven on earth.
Yeah.
I'm living heaven on earth. And so she has a lot of wonderful wisdom for us.
Yeah, I love that because, it talks about anchoring in our highest divine timelines into this reality because we can live them, each and every moment. So, between now and then, I encourage you to anchor in your highest timeline so that we can all anchor that heaven on earth and bring forward that new reality that we're all looking for. So thank you guys so much for being here. I really appreciate it. And until we're together again next time, namaste and much love, everybody. Have a great evening.
Much love, everyone. Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Victoria.